The temple bell tolled at dawn, its sound rolling like thunder over the misted courtyard. Thomas said, "Why does every note feel like a wound?" His chest tightened as the echo pressed into silence. The stone lanterns flickered in the rising light, shadows bending against the monastery walls. Master Li walked slowly, his face calm yet severe, as if carved by still waters. Thomas said, "I feel empty yet heavier than ever." The stillness broke when Master Li whispered, "Emptiness is the doorway to truth, not the burden you think it is." Thomas trembled, his eyes burning with doubt and fear. Beside the gate, Sarah stood quietly, her hands folded, her gaze a mixture of compassion and distance. Sarah said, "You are not the only one to feel hollow here." The words pierced Thomas's armor of pride. The courtyard breeze stirred, scattering dry leaves across the stones like restless spirits. Michael leaned against a pillar, his lips curling in a cynical smirk. Michael said, "Perhaps the cup is empty because there was never anything inside." The silence grew sharp, every face reflecting the weight of those words. Thomas's heartbeat thundered in his ears, louder than the bell that had started it all. His mind reeled between despair and revelation. Master Li's eyes narrowed with a calm intensity. He said, "The cup is emptied so it can be filled again, but only if you dare to release what you hold." The words cut deeper than the cold wind. Thomas staggered, clutching his robe as though to hold himself together. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Then what remains of me if all is released?" The question shattered the morning stillness like broken glass. Sarah turned away, her expression unreadable, while Michael laughed under his breath. The temple felt both vast and paid, suffocating, every sound magnified in Thomas's chest. The sun broke through the mist, illuminating the seeker's trembling hands. In that moment, the world seemed to pause, demanding that he face the truth he had long denied. The silence after the revelation lingered, pressing on Thomas's chest like a heavy stone. His thoughts swirled with fear and longing, every word of Master Li echoing in his mind like an unanswered riddle. He stepped forward, his sandals scraping against the courtyard stone, and whispered, "I don't know who I am without this weight." Master Li remained still, his face unreadable, yet his eyes seemed to peer straight through Thomas. Sarah moved gently toward him, her expression filled with empathy, though her silence cut deeper than words. Michael's laughter rang harshly again, tearing at the fragile moment. Michael said, "You search for meaning where none exists. An empty cup is just empty." The words struck Thomas like arrows, and he clenched his fists, trembling. Master Li finally spoke, his voice calm but unyielding. "The emptiness you fear is the very space where truth is born." Thomas turned sharply toward Michael, anger flooding his chest. Thomas said, "You mock, because you're afraid of silence." Michael's grin faltered for a moment before sharpening again. Master Li watched quietly, his presence steady and grounding. Sarah's eyes softened, reflecting sorrow at the clash between them. The courtyard air grew heavier, the rising sun struggling to break the mist. Thomas's voice cracked as he said, "I poured myself into this path, yet all I feel is hollow." His shoulders sagged, and his knees almost buckled under the weight of his words. Master Li finally said, "You cling to the idea of fullness when all that is needed is release." The air felt charged, as if the temple walls themselves trembled with the conflict. Sarah stepped closer, her voice low but steady. Sarah said, "Peace is not in the answers, Thomas, but in the surrender." Thomas's breathing grew heavy, his eyes darting between her, Michael, and Master Li. Michael scoffed and muttered, "Surrender is just another word for giving up." His cynicism filled the courtyard with tension. Thomas's throat tightened, torn between collapse and defiance. He whispered, "What if I vanish into this emptiness?" Master Li's gaze softened, and he replied, "Then you will finally see what has always been present." The month stretched endlessly, the sun breaking fully over the horizon, burning through the mist. Thomas fell to his knees, tears streaking his face as his voice cracked. Thomas said, "I don't know how to let go." Sarah's hand hovered as if to comfort him but never touched. Michael turned away, hiding the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Master Li stepped forward, his robe brushing the ground, and said, "Letting go is not a skill. It is a moment of surrender." The words pierced Thomas's despair like light through darkness. His sobs slowed, his breath steadied, and for the first time he felt the trembling silence within himself. The morning light filled the meditation hall, yet Thomas's mind was drowned in shadows. He sat cross-legged, his breath ragged, each exhale breaking like glass. Thomas said, "I chase silence, but only noise answers me." His voice trembled, echoing against the wooden beams. Master Li watched him from the far end, unmoving, his calmness amplifying Thomas's restlessness. Michael leaned against the wall, his smirk sharp, his tone colder than the stone beneath him. Michael said, "Perhaps silence refuses you because you are not worth hearing." The words pierced deeper than Thomas wanted to admit. Sarah shifted closer, her voice gentle, like wind brushing over still water. Sarah said, "Even emptiness responds when the heart is ready." Thomas shut his eyes, trembling. His mind screamed that he was failing, and the hollow ache in his chest widened, swallowing every fragile piece of hope. Thomas's chest heaved as he tried to force his breath steady, but the silence pressed in harder. He whispered, "I cannot escape myself." His fists clenched against his knees, sweat beading at his temples. Master Li finally spoke, his voice deep, measured, unshaken. Master Li said, "Escape is the desire of fear. What you run from is what you carry." Michael's smirk widened, his arms folding tighter. Michael said, "Or maybe he carries nothing but failure." The words stung, echoing in Thomas's mind. Sarah reached out with her voice, her tone low and compassionate. Sarah said, "Failure is only a step toward awakening." Thomas's eyes opened, filled with tears. His thoughts screamed louder than ever. "What if all I am is failure?" he whispered, his voice breaking under the unbearable weight of doubt. The silence thickened, until even the sound of Thomas's heartbeat felt deafening. His vision blurred as shame flooded him. He cried, "Why does every lesson feel like a chain instead of freedom?" Master Li remained calm, his voice like stone over water. Master Li said, "Because you carry the chain within you." The words cracked Thomas's heart wide open. Michael laughed harshly, his voice slicing through the hall. Michael said, "Or perhaps there was never freedom to begin with." Thomas shook, his tears falling onto his robe, leaving dark stains. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes glowing with quiet strength. Sarah said, "Freedom waits beneath the chains, but you must stop clutching them." Thomas bent his head, his shoulders trembling, the weight of despair pulling him lower. Thomas's voice cracked as he whispered, "I have prayed, I have meditated, I have starved myself of everything, and still the void grows." His confession spilled like blood into the silence. Master Li's gaze softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. Master Li said, "You do not grow emptiness, you feed it with your hunger to be filled." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes flickering with recognition of the truth. Michael snorted dismissively. Michael said, "He feeds it because it's all he has." The words stung, though deep within, Thomas knew they carried fragments of his fear. His fists loosened, falling open on his knees, his palms trembling, as though he could no longer carry even himself. The hall was unbearably still. Thomas's chest rose and fell as though every breath was a struggle. His voice was raw, almost broken. Thomas said, "If I let go of all I cling to, who remains?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Master Li leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp with truth. Master Li said, "No one remains, and that is freedom." The words struck like thunder in Thomas's chest. Sarah's gaze glistened, her lips parting as though to speak, but she remained silent. Michael shifted, his smirk faltering for the first time. The quiet deepened, a silence so heavy it pressed tears from Thomas's eyes. His head lowered, his tears dropping soundlessly into the shadows below. The midday sun burned against the temple courtyard, its heat pressing like judgment on Thomas's back. His knees ached from kneeling in forced meditation, sweat tracing lines down his face. Master Li's voice was steady, carrying no pity. Master Li said, "Stay with the silence until it swallows you." Thomas's teeth clenched, every nerve screaming. He whispered, "It swallows me in fear, not peace." Michael leaned lazily against the steps, smirking at Thomas's trembling form. Michael said, "Perhaps fear is all you are capable of." The words sank deep, stoking anger and despair. Sarah sat nearby, watching intently, her face calm yet shadowed with concern. She whispered, "Fear can open the door if you stop fighting it." Thomas's breath grew ragged, his chest rising and falling like storm waves. His fists dug into his thighs as if he could anchor himself against collapse. Thomas's vision blurred, the edges of the courtyard twisting in heat. His body trembled under the weight of silence. He gasped, "I cannot hold this. I am breaking." Master Li's expression remained unmoved, his words calm and relentless. Master Li said, "You must break before you can be whole." The sentence echoed like thunder, shaking Thomas's fragile grip. Michael laughed, his voice harsh. Michael said, "Break? He has already shattered. There's nothing left to mend." The taunt ripped through Thomas's chest, drawing rage that clashed with despair. Sarah leaned forward, her tone soft but urgent. Sarah said, "Breaking does not mean ending. It means beginning again." Thomas shook violently, a sob escaping, his body bowing under the storm of his inner war. Thomas's sob turned into a roar as he struck the ground with his fist, the sound cracking the silence. He cried, "Every lesson is failure. Every silence is torment." His voice shook with fury and despair. Michael clapped mockingly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Michael said finally, "Some honesty from our holy disciple." Thomas glared at him, rage and shame colliding in his eyes. Sarah's face softened, her words a gentle plea. Sarah said, "Do not fight the storm. Let it pass through you." Master Li remained motionless, his eyes steady. He said, "Anger is the fire that consumes the vessel holding it." The words stilled the courtyard, the echo lingering longer than the roar. Thomas collapsed to his knees, his breath jagged, his strength nearly gone. The courtyard grew heavy with silence, broken only by Thomas's ragged breathing. His fists trembled on the stone, his eyes wide with desperation. He whispered, "Why do you give me only riddles and pain?" His voice cracked under the weight of his cry. Master Li answered, steady as mountain air. Master Li said, "Because you seek answers when you should seek nothing." The words struck harder than a blow. Michael scoffed, shaking his head. Michael said, "Nothing? He has lived in nothingness since he arrived." Sarah's eyes glistened, her voice tender. Sarah said, "Nothingness is not emptiness. It is space for what truly matters." Thomas clutched his robe, his heart pounding like thunder, the war within him threatening to consume him entirely. Thomas's body sagged, his strength drained like water from a broken vessel. He whispered, "I am losing myself." His tears darkened the stone beneath him. Master Li leaned forward slightly, his voice unyielding yet soft. Master Li said, "Lose yourself, and you will find what cannot be lost." The words hung in the sweltering air, vibrating with truth. Sarah clasped her hands, her voice quiet but firm. Sarah said, "The path begins when you stop searching for yourself." Michael frowned, his smirk fading, his eyes flickering with unease. Thomas's head dropped lower, his shoulders slumped, yet in his despair, a fragile stillness began to bloom, fragile but undeniable, like the first breath after drowning. The temple bells rang in the distance as twilight wrapped the courtyard in deep amber tones. Thomas sat slumped, his body weak, his spirit cracked. He whispered, "I cannot carry the weight of emptiness any longer." His voice broke into the cool evening air. Master Li approached slowly, his steps echoing with authority. Master Li said, "It is not emptiness that burdens you, but your clinging to what you believe should fill it." Thomas looked up, confusion etched across his face. Sarah moved closer, her eyes soft but searching. Sarah said, "The silence you fear is the space where life breathes freely." Michael crossed his arms, smirking faintly, though unease flickered in his gaze. He muttered, "Or perhaps silence is only a mirror showing you what you wish to ignore." The words stung, yet beneath them, Thomas felt the stirrings of a truth he could no longer avoid. The air grew heavier as Thomas forced himself to his feet, swaying like a tree against strong wind. He shouted, "Then why does every step feel like drowning?" His voice cracked, echoing against the temple walls. Master Li's eyes locked on him, unwavering. Master Li said, "Because you do not drown in water, but in your refusal to release the air you cling to." The words fell like stones into Thomas's chest. Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with compassion. Sarah said, "Let go, Thomas. You cannot breathe until you surrender." Michael's laughter cut through the tension, sharp and mocking. Michael said, "Surrender is weakness, and he is already broken." Thomas's fist trembled, but instead of anger, doubt burned within, and with it came the smallest spark of recognition that perhaps surrender was not defeat, but something else entirely. Thomas's breathing grew rapid, his chest rising like a man suffocating. He cried, "If I let go, what remains of me?" His question hung, heavy with desperation. Master Li stepped closer, his gaze sharp as steel. Master Li said, "You cling to an illusion of yourself. Release it, and only truth remains." The words struck deeper than any blow, shaking the foundation of Thomas's mind. Sarah's hand reached out, though she did not touch him. Sarah said, "You fear the loss of what was never truly there." Michael's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing as if he too felt the sting of the truth. He muttered, "If nothing remains, then what meaning is there at all?" The silence after his words was piercing, the courtyard itself holding its breath. Thomas trembled, his hands hovering as though poised to release everything he had grasped for so long. The courtyard wind rose, scattering dry leaves that whispered against stone. Thomas's tears streamed freely now, as he fell to his knees. He whispered, "I am nothing, and it terrifies me." His words cracked like a vessel breaking. Master Li's voice carried across the silence, resonant and clear. Master Li said, "Nothing is what you are seeking. It is freedom from the illusions that bind you." Sarah's eyes shone with unspoken emotion. Sarah said, "You are not lost in nothingness, you are found." Michael looked away for the first time, his jaw tight, his silence louder than his mockery. Thomas bent forward, his forehead touching the cold stone, surrender trembling at the edge of becoming real. The night thickened, stars beginning to pierce through the veil of darkness, as if the heavens themselves bore witness to his unraveling. The temple bell rang once more, deep and resonant, vibrating through the courtyard like the pulse of eternity. Thomas lifted his head, his eyes red but clear for the first time. He whispered, "The emptiness was never against me. It was within me all along." His breath steadied, the words soft yet unshakable. Master Li's lips curved faintly, his eyes shining with approval. Master Li said, "You have seen what cannot be taught." Sarah's expression softened into a tender smile, her silence louder than any words. Michael shifted uneasily, his smirk gone, shadows in his gaze betraying the cracks in his certainty. The night air cooled, wrapping them in a stillness that felt both fragile and eternal. Thomas exhaled deeply, surrender washing over him like a tide, his heart lighter than it had ever been. The night deepened, silence pressing against Thomas like a storm about to break. His chest heaved, his mind thrashing with fear. He cried, "I cannot bear it, I cannot let go." His knees shook as if the earth beneath him gave way. Master Li stood unshaken, his calm presence like a mountain unmoved by storms. Master Li said, "What you resist is the door itself. Surrender, and you will see it open." Sarah's voice trembled with compassion, her hands clasped. Sarah said, "Thomas, you are not falling apart. You are breaking free." Michael's face tightened, his smirk gone, replaced by shadows of doubt. he muttered, or perhaps breaking is all there is. The words echoed but felt hollow, and for the first time Thomas sensed that Michael's defiance was fear disguised as pride. Thomas's body shook violently as tears poured down his face, his breath ragged and uneven. He whispered, "If I surrender, I will vanish." His words trembled with terror. Master Li stepped closer, his voice sharp yet gentle. Master Li said, "What vanishes is not you, but the mask you cling to." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears, her voice steady with faith. Sarah said, "The self you fear losing was never real." Michael's eyes narrowed, his tone bitter. Michael said, "Without the self, you are nothing." Yet his voice lacked conviction, as though he wrestled with his own shadows. Thomas bowed forward, his palms pressed against the stone, his cries echoing, a man caught at the edge of his deepest fear. The air pulsed with silence, so heavy it felt alive. Thomas lifted his face, streaked with tears, and screamed, "I cannot fight any more." His voice cracked like thunder in the stillness. Master Li's eyes softened and he said, "Then stop fighting, let go." Sarah's breath hitched and she whispered, "Thomas, release it. Let the storm pass through." Michael's arms dropped to his sides, his mask of arrogance slipping as unease consumed him. He muttered, perhaps nothing remains." Thomas's body collapsed forward, his forehead pressed to the stone. His cries broke into silence until finally his breath slowed, surrender seeping into his bones like the first light after endless night. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of Thomas's breathing, slow and uneven. Then, like a tide shifting, his breath calmed. He whispered, "I feel nothing, yet I am not afraid." His words floated into the night air. Master Li's lips curved in the faintest smile. Master Li said, "In nothing, you have found what is eternal." Sarah's tears fell freely, her voice soft with awe. Sarah said, "You are free." Michael turned away, his face dark with conflict, muttering, "Freedom or delusion." Yet his words trembled, robbed of power. Thomas lifted his head, his eyes clearer than they had ever been, as though a veil had been torn away, revealing peace at last. The temple bell rang, deep and resonant, shaking the night like the voice of eternity. Thomas rose slowly, his body weak but his spirit lighter than air. He whispered, "I am not broken. I am free." His words carried through the courtyard like wind through leaves. Master Li bowed his head slightly, his eyes glowing with quiet pride. Sarah smiled through her tears, her hands folded in reverence. Michael's face twisted with conflict, his arrogance shattered, his silence speaking louder than words. The night wrapped around them all, the air alive with stillness and clarity. Thomas' heart beat steady, each breath carrying the truth that freedom had always been within him, waiting for this moment of surrender. The dawn broke gently, painting the sky with strokes of pale gold and soft pink. Thomas walked slowly through the temple garden, his steps light, his chest unburdened. He whispered, "The silence no longer frightens me." His breath fogged faintly in the morning air, but his eyes shone clear. Master Li followed at a distance, his serene presence radiating approval. Master Li said, "The silence is now your companion." Sarah walked nearby, her smile tender, her voice soft. Sarah said, "I can see peace in you, Thomas." Michael lingered behind, his shoulders heavy, his face unreadable. He muttered, "Peace or illusion, perhaps both." The garden wind stirred the blossoms, scattering petals like blessings across Thomas's path. For the first time, he felt the world breathe with him, not against him. Thomas paused by a stone pond, the water reflecting the morning sky. He whispered, "I see myself, but no longer the weight of who I was." His reflection shimmered as ripples spread across the water. Master Li stood nearby, his voice calm and assured. Master Li said, "The reflection is never the water. You are not the shadow you see." Sarah crouched near the pond, her hand skimming the surface gently. Sarah said, "Even broken reflections show the light." Michael stood apart, His gaze darkened, his arms crossed tightly. He muttered, "Reflections lie. They show what you want to see." Yet his voice lacked its former sharpness, as if doubt gnawed at his defiance. Thomas smiled faintly, his breath steady, his heart still. The sound of bamboo chimes drifted through the air as Thomas sat beneath a blossoming tree. He whispered, "For the first time, I feel present." The words left him as gentle as a breeze. Master Li lowered himself beside him, his presence grounding. "Master Li," said, "presence is the gift you have always carried." Sarah leaned against the tree, her smile quiet, her eyes soft. Sarah said, "You no longer chase what cannot be caught." Michael sat on the edge of the stone path, his shoulders tense, his gaze lost in thought. He muttered, "Perhaps I have been chasing shadows too." The tree's blossoms fell like rain, covering the ground in fragile petals, and Thomas exhaled, his breath merging with the rhythm of the world. Thomas rose to his feet, stretching his arms as though unburdened for the first time. He whispered, "The emptiness I feared was the space I needed." Master Li watched him closely, his tone steady. "Master Li said in emptiness, all things are possible." Sarah's expression brightened, her voice soft yet strong. Sarah said, "The silence sings when we stop resisting." Michael turned his face away, his eyes narrowing with conflict. He muttered, "If silence sings, why do I hear only echoes?" His voice carried pain beneath its bitterness. Thomas walked forward, his steps sure, his heart unshaken, each movement a declaration that he had accepted what once destroyed him. The temple bell rang once more, its deep note rolling across the grounds like the voice of eternity. Thomas closed his eyes, his breath calm, his lips curving into a faint smile. He whispered, "I no longer search. I am here." Master Li bowed his head slightly, his eyes glowing with pride. Sarah pressed her palms together, her voice filled with quiet awe. Sarah said, "This is your awakening." Michael stood apart, his gaze distant, his silence thick with turmoil. The wind stirred, carrying fallen blossoms across the courtyard, their dance reflecting Thomas's newfound stillness. In that moment, the weight of his struggle dissolved, leaving only clarity, peace, and the gentle rhythm of the world surrounding him. The horizon glowed with the first light of dawn, streaks of pale gold cutting through the last veil of night. Thomas stood at the edge of the temple grounds, his breath steady, his gaze fixed on the rising sun. He whispered, "I am no longer lost." The air hummed with stillness, carrying his words like a prayer. Master Li approached behind him, silent as flowing water. Master Li said to be here is enough. Sarah joined them, her steps soft, her voice warm. Sarah said, "The journey does not end, Thomas. It begins anew each breath." Michael lingered at a distance, his face shadowed, torn between resistance and longing. He muttered, "And yet I still do not see." The wind stirred gently, lifting petals into the air, as if the earth itself sighed in release. Thomas stepped forward into the sunlight, its warmth bathing his face. He whispered, "The silence is not empty. It is alive." His words carried with the morning breeze, soft yet unshakable. Master Li's voice followed, calm and assured. Master Li said, "Silence has always spoken. Now you have learned to listen." Sarah's eyes filled with light, her voice tender. Sarah said, "The emptiness that frightened you has become your strength." Michael shifted uneasily, his arms dropping to his sides. He muttered, "Strength in emptiness. Perhaps I was blind." The courtyard glowed as sunlight poured over the stone, every shadow retreating, every breath woven into the fabric of awakening. Thomas lowered himself to sit cross-legged upon the courtyard stones, his palms open on his knees. He whispered, "I no longer need to seek. I am already home." The words radiated peace into the still air. Master Li stood beside him, his eyes reflecting wisdom as deep as the mountains. Master Li said, "The seeker has vanished, and the truth remains." Sarah's hands pressed together, her voice full of quiet reverence. Sarah said, "This moment will never end, even when time moves on." Michael sat down heavily at the far side, his face troubled, but his silence revealed more than words. A bird's song broke the silence, weaving itself into the air as if nature joined in his awakening. The temple bell rang softly, its echo stretching into the hills, a sound both grounding and infinite. Thomas's eyes closed, his breath merging with the rhythm of the bell. He whispered, "I am here." The words were steady, unbroken. Master Li bowed slightly, his tone firm yet gentle. Master Li said, "The truth was always within you." Sarah's tears glistened in the sunlight, her voice trembling with joy. Sarah said, "This is your freedom." Michael's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with struggle. But for the first time his silence carried respect rather than defiance. The bell's resonance faded, leaving behind a stillness that was no longer heavy but alive, a silence brimming with peace. The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth across the courtyard and mountains beyond. Thomas opened his eyes, gazing at the horizon where earth and sky embraced. He whispered, "I am not lost. I am here." The words lingered like the final brushstroke on a painting. Master Li placed his hand lightly on Thomas's shoulder, his silence filled with approval. Sarah smiled, radiant and tear-streaked, her breath catching in awe. Michael looked toward the horizon, his face shadowed yet softened, as though the cracks within him had begun to open. The wind stirred blossoms from the temple trees, carrying them skyward in a dance of light. The scene stilled, timeless and eternal, a quiet epiphany that would echo long after the last petal settled.